Go.
Okay, so we decided as a group to investigate the malaria case study. My name's Katie.
My name is Lee.
Hi, I'm Forrest. That's me.
Yes, so we're just going to kind of jump through the questions. I'm going to ask them and then we'll all respond. So for the first question, what was the aim of the study and what knowledge was learned?
So for this one, what I understood when I was reading through the material, it was essentially they took a large group of prisoners in Illinois and they were trying to assess the effectiveness of some new anti-malarial drugs and therapies. Um, in doing so, they offered the prisoners shorter sentences, and but on the contrary, they also, gave them malaria and treated them with experimental drugs, namely the two that ended up coming out looking good in this were pentaquine and primaquine. And they were indicated to have good treatment outcomes, but extremely unpleasant side effects.
Ye- Yes. To add on to that, so the bigger purpose for this as well is for the American soldier during the World War II, which was a major concern for the US at the time because the Japanese had cut off the supply for quinine, which is a standard treatment for malaria at the time. And so that's why they kind of had to do this experiment for more treatments for malaria.
Yeah, that's what I found as well. I found that pretty much the military was like kind of demanded that something happen now and it be done kind of rapidly so that it sounded like they would have one lead of or one line of soldiers out and then the other line would be sick. So they needed to get this figured out so that they could have adequate soldier amount of soldiers and for the war.
Right, because I
And
think
this
that,
was during World War II, I believe.
Yes.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so I found some of the same things, but I think this will kind of transition into the next part because I think a lot of the findings kind of go with like the rights. So the next question is concerning the five human rights of self-determination, privacy and dignity, anonymity and confidentiality, fair treatment and protection from discomfort and harm. Which of these were violated in this study and how?
Yes. So I'd say like all part of the human rights were kind of violated. So if you look into self-determination, it kind of refers to one's ability to have control over their life or one's freedom to act as they wish. And in this experiment, the subject were they in the paper it says voluntary, but um, that is questionable because they were also rewarded $100. Um, yeah, so it makes their freedom questionable, and they I said privacy and dignity is also violated because in the present setting, there's obviously a lack of privacy due to the nature of the prison, either that's at the penal institutions or the research sites in the hospital. And this may enhance um, the experiment in terms of having a controlled environment, but it may not be ethical within what we consider as human rights today. And then for anonymity and confidentiality, um, again, I said this is possibly violated because you're in an environment where it is possible to identify who agreed to participate and like what side effects or what other things are going through with this person because you're in a very, I don't know, I'd say small environments because you're in prison and you're with other people who may
Very
possibly,
narrow study, like
right, right.
yeah, okay. Mhm.
And fair treatment is also violated because subjects were selected because they are prisoners, they're vulnerable or easy access. Um, and I also thought to myself, if the subject that would be most suitable would be like the American troops or just any healthy individuals other than prisoners because they don't benefit anything from these experiments. And the protection from discomfort or harm were also violated because individuals were purposely infected with Plasmodium falciparum, um, including the mentally ill individuals from the Chicago University. And there were also no mentions of treatments for management of other side effects at the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, go ahead.
No, you can go first.
All right, yeah, like I think it's pretty clear that I agree with a lot of what Lee said. Like everything was violated. They can't withdraw for the self-determination clause because they can't stop having malaria once they get malaria. Their privacy and dignity were violated. You could argue because they were wards of the state that those rights weren't applicable, but we're talking about the scientific right, not the personal right. So therefore, it's still violated. Anonymity and confidentiality definitely violated. They were also separated by race due to systemic resistance to malaria. Fair treatment was certainly violated. Protections from discomfort and harm were certainly violated. I mean, again, they were infected with malaria. So yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said.
Yeah, I do too. I think a lot of what I wrote kind of focused on that protection from discomfort and harm because I think that was a very obvious problem with this case. I actually found that the strain that they used like a more toxic strain because they would have more what's it called? Relapses, more rapid relapses, so that they could kind of conduct the experiment at like a faster rate. And from that, the prisoners were experiencing obviously these symptoms over and over and over again, but it also came with like this really severe headache that in the study that I read, they suggested that it like felt like your head was going to split out open, and like most of the people were like they just wanted it to happen because it was that bad.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, a lot of the like different compounds of drugs that they used were known to be dangerous and unpredictable. Yet they used them, and there was like one specifically, I think it was called like it was a compound of like the 8-aminoquinoline or something like that. And what happened is any of the inmates that were injected with it ended up having heart failure and dying within like a day of using it. So, yeah. I also found that they used like more toxic doses than was, or more, yeah, they like overdosed them to kind of come up with like the worst case scenario of what could happen, knowing that that wasn't like a necessary treatment to suppress the malaria. So I thought that was just
That is a really good point. I also
crazy.
had that. So yeah,
Yeah.
really crazy.
Yeah. Anything else?
Oh,
Okay. So
limited.
then the next question is, what are ethical principles at stake? I kind of think the last one kind of just hit at these things, but I personally just kind of went through them all. So I talked about how there's not really clear and proper informed consent. The whole idea that they were kind of given the idea that they might have a lesser sentence, or monetary rewards, like those things kind of complicate that. But then also, like, they might have felt pressure and had no right to even choose in the first place, or may fear facing like improper treatment after the fact. Autonomy was another one. Prisoners were not able to make their own decision. It was really clear. Like they're not able. Like I think Forrest mentioned it earlier. Like they weren't able to refuse participation after they already been injected. Like at that point, you're kind of screwed. And so that definitely was seen throughout the case. Like, oh, I think there was over 200 prisoners that they utilized within 2 years or something like that. Beneficence and non-maleficence is a major ethical concern as well, which is kind of that like whole discomfort harm conversation we just had. I think that this case shows that harm is kind of the opposite. Like you're supposed to minimize harm and maximize benefit, and it almost kind of seemed the opposite. Like harm was maximized and benefit was minimized because sure stuff kind of came from it, but at what cost? Um, and then also they were otherwise healthy prisoners that were deliberately given something that was harmful to them. And justice obviously is another concern because the prisoners were vulnerable, which Lee mentioned. And they were a targeted population to undergo things that would have probably not been possible in other civilians. Like it probably wouldn't have even been considered. But yeah, that's kind of what I got.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said about beneficence because I remember in somewhere in the readings it says that what is it? Um that the people view the prisoners as the society's enemy, and during the war at the time it's like using the your enemy to fight your other enemy. So if they're using the viewing the prisoners as enemy, then um that goes to show that they're easy access and vulnerable
Hmm.
and no direct benefits will go to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that all three are at stake here. Like they're coerced, they don't have the ability to back out at any time. It was not distributed equally, and I definitely think informed consent was not present, so justice has been violated. And again, non-malfeasance. I mean, they've infected people with malaria. I don't like, we keep saying it, but like it bears repeating. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Very clear case that many things were not considered. Okay. Next question is what nursing code of ethic provisions highlight the nurse's obligations in this study and describe how?
So I think that I sort of went on a like what ones were clearly violated bent
Yeah.
for my answer. And I think Provision 2 and Provision 4 for the American Nurses Association Code of Ethics, because the ethical commitment from the people involved here was clearly not to the patients. The ethical commitment was to the results of the study. And again, sort of that non-malfeasance clause in number 4, the American Nurses Association Code of Ethics states that you need to prevent illness. And one more time, they actively infected them with malaria. So that is definitely, you're definitely not preventing illness if that is the case. What do you think?
I think it also relates to provision one, where nurses should practice of compassion and respect for the patient's dignity. Like in the study, it was, as mentioned before, it was unclear whether there was respect for the prisoner's dignity and under their coercive condition as a, in the prison. As like this is related to what I mentioned earlier, where prisoners were viewed as enemies and most likely did not have respect for their dignity. So as nurses, our role is to advocate for patient dignity and obtain informed consent prior to anything.
Yeah, for sure. Another one that I found was Provision 8, which explains that nurses are supposed to collaborate with other health professionals and the public to protect human rights and reduce health disparities. It didn't really appear that this case was kind of well constructed. It kind of felt like, I mean, like they had different doses and whatever that they were utilizing, but in terms of like having oversight and ensuring that the experiment was done properly, like there wasn't that. So I think like the reason I chose this provision is like as nurses, we do collaborate with other members of the healthcare team. And like in this situation, they needed health a medical care or health care for those that were experiencing adverse effects after the fact. And there wasn't really establishment that that was occurring or not. It just kind of seemed like they were suffering and
Yeah,
yeah.
it definitely smacks of the type of behavior where someone says something to the like with the military, right? Where they're like, do this study, and they're like, I don't know, I guess we'll infect a bunch of prisoners with malaria. Like that's all we can do. Like I guess we'll just
Yeah.
do that. So then
Yeah,
they were like, when do we do it? Now? Okay, well let's get some malaria and get some prisoners and let's make it happen.
right.
Yeah,
It's like we'll figure out as we go instead of having a plan for
Yeah.
exactly.
what to.
Yes, I think that is like the definition of the whole thing because they had like a semi idea of what could maybe work, but in terms of an actual constructed plan, yeah, no.
Mhm.
Okay, the next one, how could the study be altered and what should be implemented to make the study more ethical?
I think there are many, many options we can go about this, but I said to make the study more ethical, it's crucial to confirm that the individual or the prisoners are fully understanding of the potential risks and benefits. Um, and as mentioned by Muller, when the mentally ill patient were using malaria for therapeutic purpose as like a standard treatment for neurosyphilis, they may not know about the potential risk or that they do not have the capacity to understand that or being infected with malaria for the treatments of this purpose and that other side effects for malaria could or like the symptoms of malaria could be this bad that they might not have those capacities. So to understand that, so a possible alternative to this is to maybe have patients who wanted to participate in this experiment, maybe have them like mention that in their will prior to their progressions of mental health. I also said that maybe to use less harmful testing methods on animals and all this other animals or rats prior to like using it on humans to avoid harm to them. Um, and the individual must be free to withdraw at any time without fear of punishments, as Forrest mentioned earlier.
Uh, Use people who are already infected with malaria is kind of my big one.
Oh
I think that's
yes,
a really easy way to improve this study is what if we made it so people who were suffering from malaria had the opportunity to try experimental new drugs, like all the things we do in the 21st century, where it's like, oh, you have cancer, we have this cool cancer study because your every other treatment hasn't worked. Why don't you try this? That's my
that
big one,
is
but
a really good point. I think the reason why I kept mentioning about like the mentally ill patients used for malaria is just crazy how you have infected mosquitoes like bite another healthy individual just to make them suitable for your experiment. That is just crazy to me.
yeah.
You don't say. There was clearly no lack of abundance of people with malaria, considering the military was like, give us a a treatment here. I imagine there was plenty of people.
Mm-hmm.
Our soldiers are dying of malaria. Scientist to another scientist. Dude, I have a crazy idea. Like,
Gosh.
no, use the soldiers. They're already sick. Like,
Yeah.
anyway, I digress.
Yes. I honestly don't really have a lot to add because I think you both hit on like the important parts, and I think ultimately like we could dissect just about every aspect of this case and determine something that needs to be altered in every step because the whole thing was kind of not even kind of was very messy. I guess the one thing I could add is, which I mentioned before, is like making sure there's access to that medical care when they do experience adverse effects, not just making them suffer through everything and whatever. Okay, and then I think the last question here is there ever a time when the knowledge gained from an unethical study outweighs the duty to treat subjects ethically? And then the example they give is that HeLa cells are still in use and have helped eradicate polio and develop HPV vaccines and genome mapping. I think this is a hard question because ultimately, when I first read it, I'm like, well, the quick answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
However, like it does raise like some deeper thinking and conversations to be had. I think obviously it's clear that some of these studies have yielded pretty beneficial and effective outcomes. However, I personally do not think it's my place to determine if compromising someone else's health and well-being for the greater good of the community is acceptable or not. So I would want no part in that. Count me out. Um, and then ultimately, the whole thing is like, of course, if things are done ethically, like Forrest mentioned, like cancer treatments, where you might have cancer and they want to do a trial, and it's done ethically, and people volunteer with like the idea that your cancer might get better or be treated. Okay, yeah, all in. But the unethical studies, it's just it's hard to kind of get behind, and especially in like this situation, I kept thinking, I was like, well, did these prisoners like commit the worst crimes ever? Like, did they murder people and like they're deserving of it? And I was like, well, again, who am I to determine that there anybody's deserving of anything? And then also like how many people are incarcerated in wrongly convicted or whatever, or like the case, like people, there's such a wide range of reasons somebody might be in jail or prison or whatever it may be that I'm like, I couldn't justify it. So for me, it's a no, but obviously I recognize that some good things have come from it, unfortunately.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Lee, what do you think?
I honestly, this is a really hard question. I was Katie, at first I'm like, oh, it's automatically a no. But as I look into the hot cell studies, I'm like, hmm, I'm slowly changing my answer because if if we were
I'm
to
not
look at
judging.
if we were to look at this from a utilitarian perspective, right, where um where the benefits in this case outweighs the risk. And I looked and I think the benefits did outweigh the potential harms of um of the bad things of patient and ignoring patient autonomy and consent because I I found that over the past decades, like so many things, good things have came out of it. Like over 100,000 publications were made, research based were made using this information. And yeah, and I thought since the benefits outweighs the way the risk, specifically for this, um, then I said that we should move forward with we should use information because things can't be fixed. But we should move forward with prioritizations and patient's consent and respect for dignity moving forward.
Mhm.
All right. There's a reason I wanted to go last. I'm gonna get my
Uh-oh.
soapbox out. Okay. So the
He's
answer to
got to
your
stretch
question is
for
no.
this. This better be
And
good.
here's why. Over the course of human history, there have been a number of studies that have shown to be uh, extremely inhumane but have extremely effective outcomes. And largely, these studies, like the HeLa study and the HeLa cells with the poliovirus and the HIV vaccines and genome mapping, um, I would argue that most, if not all, of these results could have been achieved ethically if proper resourcing and funding was provided to the scientists and physicians at the time. A great example of this in our modern day is the COVID vaccine that was developed within a year. That was not developed in a year because we did a bunch of things that were unethical and hurt a bunch of people. It was developed in a year because we all, at least the majority of the scientific community, agreed that this was a serious problem and we all worked really hard to solve it. So while I do not think it is ethically appropriate to discard helpful results and data from studies that have been performed unethically, like we shouldn't just get rid of the HeLa
Right.
like
Yeah.
material because the study was done unethically. I think that as a group of like organisms, right? Like as people, we have the technology and the ability to do these studies ethically. So I do not think it is within our best interest to compromise our convictions in doing so because we have the ability to do it. We just need to resource it properly.
Oh, 100%. This is like just a prime example of how like history and science is all interconnected. Because in like history class when we're younger, they are always telling us, oh, you need to learn from your past. Well, this is a prime example of learning from it and adapting so that the systems and methods that we use now serve all the people that are involved without harming them. So I think you nailed that on the head. But like you said, like yeah, obviously we're not going to get rid of all this information that we have because we would be dumb too. Like we need to take, and unfortunately, you take advantage of the kind of lack of judgment, therefore, that happened before. But
It's
yeah,
like it sucks that this is how we got this information. But I mean,
Yeah.
we have it now, so we might as well use it.
yeah,
Mhm.
I hear ya.
Plus, back then we didn't have all these standards that we have today, because as mentioned by Jessica Stump, it was uncommon back then for physicians to conduct research without patients' knowledge and consent. So that's probably why it was done too.
Yeah.
But no
Oh,
excuse.
I'm sure there was so many different
Mhm.
factors that contributed to how things happened then and how things happen now.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
Nailed it.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys.
All
Thanks,
right.
Katie.
Thank
Thanks, Lee.
you.